بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Welcome everyone to our first interview with the Muslim Minorities Monitor. Our guest today is Mr. Arslan Hidayat, who will be joining us shortly now, inshallah. As you all know, the topic of today's interview is Uyghur in East Turkestan, and inshallah with Mr. Arslan, who is Uyghur activist, we will be discussing several topics regarding the Uyghur issue in East Turkestan and the truth about everything that is going on in East Turkestan and the problems with the Chinese government that is practicing oppression on Uyghur. We are waiting for Mr. Arslan to join us shortly. Mr. Arslan, welcome to the interview. Can you hear me?
Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Welcome, Mr. Arslan, and thank you for joining us.
Alaikum salam. Nice to be on your live show.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. And we know that you have a busy schedule, so we thank you for taking some time with us. Today, inshallah, we will speak about the Uyghur issue in East Turkestan. And first, we would like to introduce you to our audience. Mr. Arslan Hidayat is an Australian Uyghur activist residing in Istanbul, Turkey, and he's also an English teacher. And today, inshallah, he'll be speaking with us about East Turkestan and Uyghur. First of all, Mr. Arslan, we have realized that most people have little knowledge about East Turkestan and Uyghur. So we would like you to just give us a brief introduction to East Turkestan. Where is it located, and what is the importance of its location specifically to China?
Yes, just let me try and get a good. I can put this down here. Is that better? Try and get that.
Yeah, that's very good.
Okay. So, yeah, East Turkestan is located bordering Russia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan. You got Pakistan and India towards the west. So it's a very strategic area. East Turkestan is based on the names of the two governments that were formed. One, the East Turkestan Islamic Republic in 1933, and again 10 years later, the East Turkestan Republic that was established in 1944 to 49 until the communists came, and then later it was changed to the name Xinjiang, which literally means new land, new frontier. And the Uyghurs have been fighting for the land, for their independence for the past 70 odd years, because we have seen no freedom whatsoever under China's occupation. And people forget to realize that, or don't seem to understand that it is occupied land, just like Palestine. If people can start to understand that, then that would be really good.
Thank you. And why is it so important for China to occupy East Turkestan? What is the importance of its location? Does it have a strategic location, or what exactly?
Yes, so it does have strategic, it is a strategic location. And number two, there are a lot of resources, and it literally makes up 1/6 of China. So it's a very large, it's probably, I think it's considered the largest province in China, if I'm not mistaken. And right now, for the past, I believe, 5 to 6 years, the current President Xi Jinping has initiated this always bringing back to life this ancient trade route many have heard as the Silk Road, and the actual project is called the One Belt One Road project. And basically all the routes go through East Turkestan, and it's basically it doesn't just favor China's economy, but it favors a lot of the Central Asian nations, a lot of the Middle Eastern countries, and even Turkey and the rest of Europe, and even Russia. So they have recently, in the past, especially the last 3 years, really cracked down, really wanting to take control of that area, because they realize in a few years' time, once this project does, if it gets on its feet, there'll be a lot of foreign influence, and they want to basically control the Uyghurs now before all hell breaks loose, because it'll be more difficult to control once that project is on its way.
Surely a strategic location like this would have attracted several major powers in the region over history. I mean, we know that China only occupied the land in about 1949 or so, but throughout the history, there must have been some major powers, other major powers, because nations rise and fall. So, was China the first power that tries to occupy East Turkestan, or has there been any other attempt?
No, so it's currently it's the Chinese Communist Party that's been basically ruling East Turkestan for the past 70 years. Before the governments that I talked to you about, you had the Chinese nationalists, and then you had the Manchurians, you had the Qing dynasty, you had various different nations, Russia at a point in time, and but predominantly the Turkic people themselves. It's not just the Uyghurs. So you got the Kazakhs, the Kyrgyz, the Tajiks, the Tatars, the Uzbeks. They all. You have to remember that there was a part of there was a time where there was a place called Turkestan. So and then later you had Western and then East Turkestan. So Western Turkestan today would be your Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, all your stans, all your Turkic nations. So yeah, just historically, we've all studied the area, but we tend to forget about East Turkestan because it's been covered up, and it's always been part of China. We are educated, and if anything pops up, it's China's internal issues. But yeah, it's been we've had power, we've lost power, and essentially the people of Turkey today come from those lands.
Yes, of course. And once you read history, you learn that occupiers throughout history tends to create a demographic change in the land they occupy. In the late 1990s, there was the Kosovo War, and many Albanians were driven out of their homes, possibly 1 million of them. You have Palestine and Israel now. So it's very clear that this is a method that almost every massive power that occupies other land take. Were there such tactics in East Turkestan to create a demographic change?
Yeah, yes, they have been doing so since 1949. For the first big change we saw was the Cultural Revolution. And even just before the Cultural Revolution, they were trying to change our language, so the script. So every 20 years or so, they change. We've used various types of different scripts. So post our two governments, we pretty much adopted the Arabic script for when we speak Turkish. And then the Chinese came and they changed it to Latin I believe, in 1962. And then they changed it back to Arabic in 1982. In the late 70s, early 80s, they brought in, you may have heard, the one-child policy.
Yes, of course.
However, the Chinese themselves having one child, but the Uyghurs were limited to 2 children, and your 3rd child was pretty much killed, aborted, or you had to pay a massive fine, or you had to keep it a secret. You had to basically register it under someone else's name, and so and now through language, they're trying to get rid of our language. And even today, saying a simple word like Assalamu alaikum, the way that we dress, see me having this beard, so everything that has to do with culture and religion is being made illegal. And these are some of the reasons. And basically any reason simply for being Uyghur, you're going into these, you may have heard, these concentration camps.
Of course. And of course, any occupier would face resistance from the people who own the land and who have lived there. Were there any resistance or conflict between the China and the people of East Turkestan?
Yes, but so we had a lot more resistance back. Say the first sort of resistance came, as I mentioned before, after the one-child policy. So we had what we call the Baden Township Massacre, which happened, I believe it was 1990 or the early 1990s, where people stood up to the various policies that China had placed on the people. And about 7 years later, towards the north of East Turkestan, in a city called Gulja, there was another uprising. Basically, people asking for their rights, their Islamic rights, their Uyghur rights, and another slaughter happened. And unfortunately, every 10 years or so, there is a culling of a generation of young Uyghurs, but it doesn't get because it doesn't get the media attention it deserves. It's covered up very easily. The army go in, and it's forgotten about. In 2009, the Urumqi massacre, again, some youth simply asking for their political rights. It wasn't even a violence initially. It wasn't violent at all. Just people walking on the streets. And it was reminiscent of the Tiananmen massacre that happened in 1989. And also reminiscent of what's currently happening in Hong Kong. But Hong Kong is technically a democratic, free, even though it's under the Chinese Communist Party, this one state, 2 systems, they have been able to protest, they have been able to get all the media attention. Any protests in Palestine, any uprisings there, they get the media attention. But because we don't get the immediate attention, any uprising that does happen, it is not able to follow through or continue, because there is no media, there is no social media, there is no Facebook, there is no Instagram, there is no Twitter. So news is very difficult to get out.
Of course, the media plays a major role in gathering support for resistance and for anyone who are striving to gain their own free will and to have their own independence. And that's what we're trying to play a portion of here at the Muslim Minorities Monitor. But surely there was some violence, and you have spoke about some massacres that happened against the East Turkestani people. Could you walk us through a brief history of the violence in East Turkestan conducted by the Chinese forces?
So the violence, ever since it was annexed in 1949, so in 1955 it was officially annexed. Initially, a lot of the rich people, a lot of the educated people, a lot of businessmen were killed off, were executed, because communism, the system itself, doesn't believe in capitalism, doesn't believe that people should have more than the other. Everyone should be economically equal. And so before China opened its doors after the Cultural Revolution, a lot of our, as I mentioned, our educators, even deen, even religion, all types of religion, not just Islam. So mosques were burnt to the ground, churches, not synagogues, there aren't Jews there, temples, Buddhists. So any sort of religion was looked down upon. Imams were killed. The Quran was made illegal. And then when you get to about 1980s, there is a little bit of softening up. Yes, they introduce the one-child policy, but there is a little softening up of deen. So I've heard of many older brothers saying that they were able to carry their Quran, you know, in their hands, and they were able to practice their deen, generally speaking. And then so you have times of free, like a little bit, you wouldn't call it total freedom, but a little bit of freedom, and then a culling, and then another 5 to 10 years of freedom, and then another culling. So and each time, as time goes on, the Uyghur culture and the Uyghur and Islam is slowly disappears every 10 years or so. It gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and it looks like this time round, it's like the final solution. They want to get rid of the Uyghurs once and for all. So they've pretty much mimicked what the Germans are doing. And so we've had people basically in these camps brainwashed, you know, to forget. I mean, the Uyghurs in general are brainwashed anyway. They don't realize, even the ones that have been living in democratic nations for the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years, they themselves are still brainwashed. They still live the effects of that. When you talk to them, they won't realize it, but they are. And not just that, the people in the camps are on 400 to 500 calories a day. They are made to carry heavy shackles, 5 to 10 kilos. The women are sterilized. Initially, when most of the men were taken, all the women were left alone in the homes, and Chinese officials had to pretty much, they were made to live with these men. And astaghfirullah, certain things happened, and a lot of young girls and the women got pregnant. Some of them, you know, killed themselves because of what had happened to them. So eating, sleeping, I don't even think this even happened in Nazi Germany. So they're trying to not just assimilate, but exterminate the ones that they can't seem to assimilate. And so someone like my father-in-law, he's a comedian, a very famous comedian. Everyone knows him in the Uyghur culture. He himself is currently in these camps for almost a year now, and we haven't heard from him. And he was never political. He was not a fighter. He was not an uprising of any sort. He was a Muslim who went to the mosque. He did Hajj. He went to Turkey. You know, just basic things that could get you into concentration camp.
Yeah, such a terrible situation to hear about. And to break off the terminology to our audience, and for those who don't understand, when we say Uyghurs, who exactly are we talking about?
So we actually pronounce it as Uyghur, but in the West, it's very difficult to say. So they say Uyghur. So the Uyghurs are a Turkic nation related to the rest of the Turks around the world. So even our language is very similar to Turkish, to the Kazakhs, to the Uzbeks, to the Kyrgyz. So we are basically one of, there are a few other Turkic groups that don't have a country, like the Tatars, like the Ahıska Turks, but we are the worst off. We are, for example, a lot of these other Turkic nations, they live within Russia. And as far as I understand, they have general freedom because mosques are built. The Muslims in Russia generally get to live free. And so, but at the same time, we know that a lot of our Central Asian brothers, the current governments, those Turkey, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, they themselves are going through oppression. But they have a nation of their own. We don't have a nation of our own. So we belong to the Turkic family. And yeah, this is us.
Of course. And
And actually, we were the first Turkic Islamic state. So I'm sure you've heard of the Turkish series Ertuğrul, maybe.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So before Ertuğrul, the first Islamic state was the first Turkic Islamic state was established in East Turkestan by Sultan Saat Bughrahan. So that's something.
And we
Yeah,
also
something very.
discovered through our research that East Turkestan, or the Uyghur people, are actually prior to the Ottoman Empire, they have existed
Yeah.
in the region which they live in now. So not only that, before they are the first Turkish Islamic State, they are the first Turkish nation ever, and from them the other Turkish nations have
Yeah.
migrated to different lands. But you have
Yeah.
mentioned Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Tatar and other Turkish countries, or let's say countries which have Turkish origins. What's the relationship, or let's say the reality of the relationship between the people of these countries and the people of East Turkestan? We know the governments are not exactly very helpful, but the people, are there any social or some sort of relationships between the nations?
Of course. However, I can't really talk too much on that because I haven't been to those nations. But generally speaking, we understand each other's languages, and especially when we are in Turkey, we are very friendly with each other. We know of each other, but I can't really talk about because the Kazakhs in Kazakhstan are different from the Kazakhs in Turkey, because the Kazakhs in Kazakhstan have grown up with communism. And even after they were free after the Soviet war, they still were living under a lot of oppression without Islam. Obviously, they still had their culture, but they know of us, and we are basically, blood brothers. Of course, everyone comes from Adam alayhi salam, but we are genetically linked in this way because we know each other as Turks. They know the Uyghurs, they know the situation, but they themselves, because the Kazakhs, the Kyrgyz, the Uzbeks themselves are oppressed people, there is not much, they themselves are not politically active. But recently, only in the last 2 years, the Kazakh people, or a small fraction of them, have become politically active because the Kazakhs themselves are also in those concentration camps.
Of course, yes.
Yeah,
Once they taste the suffering, they start to be more active.
yeah,
Uh, in the United Nations, um, their own official label for East Turkestan is a region that has autonomy under the official authority of China. Is this true?
yep.
Does East Turkestan have autonomy, or is it just
Great.
some media propaganda?
No, no, no. On paper, on, on the dotted line, East Turkestan, its official name known to the world is the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and that just means it's a it's a new land where the majority are the Uyghurs, and it's supposed to be autonomous, but the Uyghurs have seen no autonomy. So the main leader is not Uyghur, and even our Uyghur leaders and our governors and our prime ministers, they themselves are puppets. They are chosen by the Chinese government. They themselves have no independence. So recently, probably our most powerful leader recently was himself imprisoned. And whenever they imprison such prominent people, they say, oh, he was evading tax or he did this. But even the most loyal people who have worked for the Chinese Communist Party, they themselves are being locked up. Police officers, actors, comedians, politicians who are Uyghur. So, and these people, they've never prayed Salah in their life. They don't emanate the Uyghur culture. So simply by nature or by blood being Uyghur, they have been locked up as well. So it's gotten to a stage where you used to say, oh, he got locked up because he went to Hajj. He got locked up because he was caught praying. It's not that anymore. If you're Uyghur, you are locked up. It's gotten to that stage. So it's been years and years of oppression where, because generally it's like, oh, as long as I'm not politically active, I am okay. But now you could have no deen, no culture, and you are locked up. So on paper, we are autonomous, but in practice, we are not at all. If from the beginning, from 1955, if we were given true autonomy, there would be no independence movement, and we would be happy living under Chinese occupation. But it has not been the case, and we do not trust the Chinese Communist Party anymore, even if they were to give this autonomy, because they would take it back at any moment.
Of course. And they are trying to eradicate the whole nation from its roots. That's why they expanding their target of oppressed audience, if we may call them that. But uh, recently we have heard of some incidents of some Uyghur citizens who were supposed to be deported from different countries, like Ablakim Yusuf from Doha, Qatar, and Rina, the sister with her daughter from Turkey. Does Turkey play a role or any influence, whether it's officially by the government or does the Turkish people, do they have any influence in East Turkestan?
No. So for the longest time, the Turkish Republic themselves have supported the Uyghurs. They know of the Uyghur cause. Even in their Turkish history lessons, they teach who the Uyghurs are. And they say these Uyghurs are our ancestors. We come from their land. We migrated from Turkestan. The Turkish people know this, the Turkish government knows this. But because China, with its money, with its economic power, they have been able to buy countries like Turkey, a lot of the countries in the Middle East. So money is talking very loudly when it comes to the Uyghur situation. So this notion that we hope that Turkey changes its ways, but Turkey has been bailed out many times by China recently, and because they've lost their relationship with America, they've had to leech onto another superpower for its own survival. Turkey is going through huge economic turmoil. Their people are literally starving, so they've had to pretty much pick the lesser evil, if you will. That's the best I can put it. But at the same time, they are able to support Philistine. They are able to support Syria. But when it comes to us, we've lost that support. Yeah.
Yes, and as you say, China does play a major role when it comes to the international community and influencing many underdeveloped countries. We recently have learned that many countries, European countries, have appealed to the Human Rights Council in the United Nations to condemn,
Yeah.
just simply condemn the oppression by the Chinese government, only to be surprised 2 days later that a list which mostly Muslim countries have signed on has been sent a
Yeah.
letter to the United Nations to support China, which only shows the influence of the Chinese government. But how does the Uyghur people socially and how do they receive this news? How do they feel about when they see Muslim countries signing off on a letter that's supporting China when non-Muslim countries are signing off on a letter that condemns China?
Yeah, so even those countries, those Muslim countries that signed to support China, Palestine was amongst those countries. And Palestine, of all nations, should know about oppression. We've come to realize that Islam, or these so-called Islamic nations, I don't like to label these nations Islamic nations. I would like to call them Muslim populated nations, because if they were truly Islamic, if they were truly following the Sharia, they wouldn't have done what they had done. So they are literally supporting oppression against the Muslims. They are supporting, technically, I don't want to make it, a kafir versus the mu'min type of situation because we're living in the West, but that's essentially what's happened. You are supporting the disbeliever to oppress the believers. And Allah will ask each and every one of those leaders that have done this. But again, I mentioned Palestine. We wish we had the dhulm, the oppression of Palestine, because Palestine, compared to East Turkestan, is still quite free. Because in Palestine, there is salah, there you can pray, you can wear hijab, there is adhan, you can learn Quran, you can speak Arabic, you can give your children Muslim names. You can throw a rock, and when you throw that rock, there is a camera, and that rock is all over the Western media. Each person, there is a shaheed in Palestine. We know his name, we know which school they went to, we know where they worked. So, wallah, I've heard many people in their dua say, we wish the dhulm, the oppression of Palestine was upon the Uyghurs, because wallahi, that would be a holiday for us.
That's such, unfortunately, it's very sad. The topic
Yeah.
of different countries signing a letter supporting China it's controversial, and we have had some debate about it with different people who had different opinions about it. It's understandable for Palestine, because when you think about it, Palestine is not really in control of their decision. They probably did not even know that they were actually supporting China.
Know about it,
Yeah, so it's not that's very shocking as it may be, but other names on the list may be very shocking. We do hope that Qatar have withdrew from the list, and we call upon all other countries to also withdraw from this letter, at least just even though it has no effect in reality. Because China, whether you support them or not, they're not going to stop their oppression just because you signed a paper. But it's just a representation of your position in support of the Uyghur people. To conclude our interview, we just want to know, in the face of the attention that the Uyghur case is having now after the case of Abdulkim Yusuf and Rina, some international attention have been brought to Uyghur case and your cause. If you were standing in the United Nations now, or the Security Council, what would you say? What are your demands? What exactly do you expect from the international community, considering the reality of the Chinese influence and their major influence over other countries?
I would tell the United Nations, I would ask them, why was the United Nations established in the first place? So after World War II, after all the atrocities that happened in Germany and in Europe, I would say, guys, look back at your own history, learn from the mistakes. They've promised never again, as you know, that they would never let the Holocaust happen again. And they are literally, it's Holocaust Part 2 happening again. Where people are dying in these camps, their bodies are not given back, and it's literally World War II playing all over again. And so we would say, learn from history. Everything isn't money, and the world can influence China. And I would tell the UN to recognize East Turkestan as an occupied land. If we can get the world to recognize that it is occupied land, then this would be a huge victory for us, and this is where the change would actually come. And I would ask them to sanction the leaders, and this, not just condemnation, real action needs to be taken. When do they decide to take this action? I'm not sure. Once everyone's dead, or do we have to see bodies being, I'm sure, because there is evidence of crematoriums built around the camps. It's all over the internet. So I'm not really sure what they're waiting for. Real action needs to be taken before it's way too late.
True, very true. And we learned that the actual government of East Turkestan, you described them, and I quote here, a puppet controlled by the Chinese government. But there is also an entity which we learned about, called the East Turkestan Government in Exile. Can you just
That's
educate us
different.
about who are they and what is their role in East
Yeah.
Turkestan?
So I didn't say so. The actual government, there is no East Turkestan government in East Turkestan or in Xinjiang. The Xinjiang government, which is ruled by China, and the Uyghur ministers, Uyghur officials work in the government. They have no influence whatsoever. This is what I meant. So we have a few governments in exile. So they are organizations basically raising awareness of the Uyghur cause. And so together with this, there are various other organizations, just like the government's exile. Probably the most popular and the one that's most accepted in the United Nations currently is called the World Uyghur Congress. And so anytime the Uyghur issue is brought up on a world platform, that's the organization that is being represented. There are a lot of organizations that stand up for the Uyghurs, but the World Uyghur Organization are the most, I would say, experienced and the most recognized of all the other Uyghur organizations.
And the World Uyghur Congress, where
Congress.
exactly do they work? Are they located in
Yeah.
East Turkestan or are they in a foreign country?
No. So there is no independence movement in East Turkestan. It's impossible. It's not like Spain, where people want a Catalonia and they do the movement within Spain, or Scotland. Are you from the UK?
No, I'm not.
No. Okay, so you know, Scotland, they wanted to be independent from the UK, and they voted to be, and they didn't win. But nothing happened to Scottish people. They weren't killed or they weren't put into jail for wanting independence. So there is no independence movement in East Turkestan. They are mostly in Europe and America, but the World Uyghur Congress is based in Germany.
In Germany. Well,
Yeah, in Germany.
that's very promising, and we hope that they would have more influence. And of course, here at the Muslim Minorities Monitor, we support any entity or organization that stands for the Uyghur people.
Yeah.
We have learned that there are other organizations such as the
Yes.
East Turkestan National Awakening Movement, the East
Yes.
Turkestan
Yep.
Government in Exile, and others. So we wish all the best for them. And to conclude this interview, what would you like to have as a final statement or a message for our audience or the world generally?
So I feel that the plight of the Uyghur Muslims, many people still don't know about it. So if you hear about the Uyghur Muslims, share. I help run a Facebook page called Talk to East Turkestan. So please follow that page, and my own Facebook page, my own Twitter page. Just share the news because we are not getting enough attention. Follow these organizations that you've just mentioned as well. Donate $1, a pound, a dinar if you can. And like I said, because it's not getting enough attention, we need the people to wake up. We need the Muslims to come back to Islam. We ask Allah to guide our leaders, and and we pray to Allah for Muslims all around the world to be lifted from oppression.
I mean, thank you, Mr. Arslan Hidayat, for joining us, and it's been such a pleasure having you with us. We hope to have you on future interviews, inshallah, talking about different topics, and hopefully, inshallah, someday we could celebrate the victory of East Turkestani people together. And
Inshallah.
thank you for your time, and hope to see you soon again.
Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.